Okay. All right, so everybody, thank you for tuning in. My special guest today is Michael Sorensen. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and this is my show. I talked with the artists, authors, and entertainers. And Michael, you're a best-selling author, and your book is called "I Hear You: The Surprisingly Simple Skill Behind Extraordinary Relationships." Thank you for being on the show today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. I'm going to play my little intro real quick, and then we're going to dive into his book. Michael's book. It's about validation, empathetic listening skills, and relationship building. So I'm really excited about this. I just actually finished listening to the audiobook too, Michael. So.
Oh, nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, great.
Welcome to the Adam Messer Show. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and I interview authors, artists, and entertainers. We discuss their process, how they overcome obstacles, and their creative works. I hope you enjoy the show. All right, Michael. So, we're here. I appreciate you. I came across your book, and do you mind if I just call it "I Hear You"? Is that okay for short?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
I came across "I Hear You" because I listen to audiobooks every day going into work, and your book came up as a suggested book on Audible. And I was like, let me check this out because, I feel like I can always work on my listening skills. And I wasn't sure it was about that at first, but, I was like, oh, I hear you. What is this, So I checked it out, picked the book up, started listening to it. And I started using the principles of your book the very first day. I mean, I don't had a chance to listen maybe 15 or 20 minutes on my way into work from it. And I started using those tips about validation and listening the very first day.
Oh, I love it. And how did it play out?
I found it pretty interesting because at first it felt a little canned, it felt a little forced.
Sure.
But I started, trying to practice it a little bit better. Can you tell the listeners, and I know you do this, you do a great job with your first part of the audiobook, but can you tell the listeners about yourself and your background?
Sure. So my background is perhaps somewhat unorthodox for a relationship coach and even an author, in that I never wanted to write a book, and I didn't go to school to be a marriage therapist or relationship counselor. I actually stumbled into all of this, if you will, a number of years ago, probably 10 years ago now. I started seeing a therapist to get help working through a number of different issues in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I met with this therapist weekly, sometimes twice a week, for almost 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And learned a whole slew of valuable relationship skills and principles that were just not taught in day-to-day life. And they completely transformed the way I lived my life. They made it easier for me to connect better with others. At the time, I was a manager of about 25 people at work, and it made my life a whole lot easier as a manager. And of course, impacted my romantic relationships and my family relationships. And ultimately, after using all of these skills, and that one skill in particular, Adam, you mentioned validation, it was making such a difference in my life that I was trying to share it with people
Mm-hmm.
and teach people about it. And so I tried to find books on the topic, and I couldn't really. And I found a few online articles, but none that really taught it in the way that I felt was most effective. And
Mm-hmm.
so after a number of months, the thought popped into my head, well, you should write the book, Michael. And of course, my inner critic shot back and said, that's funny. Who are you to write a book? Who's going to listen to you? You're a nobody as far as the world's concerned. But long story short, I had experience after experience after experience that kept pushing me to write this book and to try to share these principles that I learned in therapy with the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is that book. I published it a little over 2 years ago now. And like you mentioned, Adam, it's titled I Hear You. And since that point, it has just skyrocketed. It's been such an incredible journey because, I published it just hoping it would help one person,
Mm-hmm.
10 people, just that was my focus on it. Was okay, I'm going to put this out there. It's helped change my life. I hope it will help someone else's. That'll make it worth it. And it's just skyrocketed. And now it's consistently an Amazon #1 bestseller. Just this last week, it was actually #3 on the Amazon chart of all nonfiction books. It has been and is on Audible's best-selling list, and it's just exploded. And so, that's my background. That's where I'm at now. And now my primary focus is to continue to share these principles and skills with the world.
I was taken aback by your honesty right up at the front part of the book, and I imagine that's just because there's so many leadership and self-development books out there, and I loved your honesty because a lot of times people think, oh well, I don't have the credentials, I don't have this or I don't have that, and you saw an opening for an issue that this skill set that you had worked on and developed within yourself, and you said, hey, I'd like to read more about this, I'd like to see more about it, and then finding there wasn't more of that, you said, hey, let me fill this out and write this, and maybe it can help somebody else, and boom, the success of that followed. So I really admire that. I think it's a lot of I think it took a lot of work, a lot of courage to do that. So nice job on that.
Thank you. Thank you. It definitely was vulnerable, and still is, to be frank, to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, especially, I was most nervous about the people who knew me closest. It's what's that old adage? A prophet's not a prophet in his own country.
Mm-hmm.
That people are like, well, that's just Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who are you? Who are you to write a book about relationships? I don't even like you that much, right? Or whatever it is, right? Depending on my relationship with people at work and such. And so it definitely was. It was pretty scary putting that out into the world there. And so I'm very grateful and very fortunate that it has gone the way that it has.
Well, I took an emotional intelligence class in my undergrad. And, Daniel Goleman talks, about emotional intelligence in a lot of his different works. And I love the fact that you bring up, you don't necessarily hit on emotional intelligence, using the verbiage per se, but you talk a lot about empathy. You talk a lot about empathetic listening and just being able to understand the other person's perspective. And one of the things that I took away immediately that just kind of struck me right off the bat, was that you can validate someone without having to agree with them.
Absolutely.
The reason why it stuck out with me was because, often if you say, if you're agreeing with their perspective, you're validating that they're right. And that's the way I've always felt. And then I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to necessarily agree with them to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I learned immediately from your book was, that validation. Can you talk more about exactly what validation is because I think we all know what it is, but to put it in words and to say, hey, this is what, a situation where, yeah, this is how I feel, and I can understand how you feel. Can you kind of describe how you came across that and put the name, coin the term with that feeling?
Sure, absolutely. So the main premise of my book is that the great listeners of the world, the people that we say are great listeners, they do more than just listen. They listen to people. They seek to understand what it is that they're feeling. And then they validate that emotion. And the term validation, in the context of interpersonal skills anyway, essentially means helping somebody feel heard and understood. It's saying to them, I see where you're coming from. That makes sense that you're feeling that way. And so, sorry, I'm a little distracted. Someone just rang the doorbell and the dog's barking. So if I sound a little scatterbrained, that's
okay.
And so validation is powerful because a lot of times we talk about the importance of listening, right? We say, well, just if you're a good listener, people like you. And while that's true, if you just listen to the words people say, it really only takes you so far. What people want is to feel like you understand the emotion that they're sharing. And so that's the key difference there. between just listening and hearing, I argue in my book, is that you're showing them that you understand how they're feeling. And so a very simple example, if you're just listening to somebody and say your coworker comes to you and he's venting to you about another coworker and saying, can you believe that he did this? He does this every single time and it's driving me crazy. Well, a lot of us might initially jump in with advice.
Yeah.
Right? We might say, well, did you just talk to him about it? And then what happens? Then the guy just usually shoots back and says, well, of course I talked to him about it, but he never changes.
Yeah.
Right? Or he says, well, no, I'm not going to talk to him about it because blah, 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 blah. And he almost gets defensive, your coworker, right? Which is kind of odd for most of us, because then we think, well, why are you venting to me if you don't want help fixing the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the reason he's coming to you is that he doesn't necessarily want advice or assurance. He just wants you to hear him. And so a more validating response would be to put your advice aside and go, oh my gosh, he did it again, right? Or I can't believe that, or that would drive me crazy. All of those statements are validating, because basically what you're saying is, I see that you're frustrated, and it makes total sense that you're frustrated.
Yeah, kind of like you're not crazy for feeling that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny because it's so simple, but most of us don't really recognize it. I didn't recognize it until I went to therapy. And yet it's very eye-opening, and what's funny is I started thinking back on a lot of my own experiences where there were certain people in my life that I would always go talk to when something amazing happened or when something really difficult happened. And then there were people that I just frankly avoided. I liked the people. They were friends, but I wouldn't ever take to them anything that was big and exciting or big and heavy.
Yeah.
And I realized later the reason was, the difference there is the people that I wanted to confide in, they were the ones that were good at validating, because they wouldn't try to fix my situation right away. They would just listen, and they would get in it with me. They would have that empathy. Whereas the people that I tended to avoid or didn't feel very close to, those were the ones that would try to fix it. They would try to say, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
All out of good intention. But what that does is it kind of shoots down the emotion that I'm feeling. And I go, well, but I am feeling this way. Well, you shouldn't feel that way. He didn't mean to hurt you. Oh, okay. Thanks.
That was
what I was looking for.
That was an aha moment for me too, in the book about the validation and the invalidation. It just struck out for me that the really good listeners are the ones that just let you vent sometimes. And I mean, it's not necessarily venting in a bad way. Sometimes this might be just a good thing. You just want to share something. And I think one of the examples you talked about in the book was like, you have something really exciting you want to share, and the other person's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's great.
Right.
They totally invalidated your feeling about it. It's like, well, why didn't I tell you in the first place? kind of thing.
Right.
And I think we can all understand it, have had that experience, or like you said with the coworker thing. There's another example in the book where the guy is complaining about, being overlooked for a raise and that kind of thing. And the situation where the guy is, just this frustrated because he feels like he's been passed up unfairly. And, I think we can all kind of identify with situations like that. And, the neat thing about it is you can apply this to your entire day. Every relationship you have, you can apply these skills to the conversations you have with people. And that's one of the things I love about it, Michael.
Absolutely. And it's so versatile, Adam, because, we talked about the workplace. Obviously, it makes a huge difference if you're married or if you're dating. It makes a difference with your family. There really is no area in life, as far as a relationship's concerned, that this doesn't make an impact. It's so versatile, because at the end of the day, we're all human. Yeah. Right? And we all have this innate desire to feel heard and understood. It doesn't matter if you're a 5-year-old little boy or if you're an 85-year-old man. It doesn't matter, your race, your background, your gender. We all just want to feel heard and understood. And that's why I think this principle is so powerful, because it's such a simple yet effective way of communicating that.
And I love the title, the I Hear You, because, it's like you can hear somebody, but you're not hearing them. And I like how you broke that down. It's like, we listen, and we can listen for, content, or we can listen for, understanding, or we can just listen to just to hear what they're saying. But when you really hear somebody, you connect with them and you understand how, not only what they're saying, but how they're feeling at the time. And I've noticed just by practicing the conversation skills like that, I've had better conversations with people. There have been a couple of people that, they're always on the defense. They're always doing stuff that I don't really like. And, I'm forced to interact with them at work. And so I've used those conversation skills with them, and it's made the impact, being able to talk with them, a lot easier for me, because a lot of times they're just negative people, and
Yeah.
and so I just try, instead of taking on their emotional baggage, I'm just like, yeah, I can understand how you could feel, frustrated. And it just has changed that whole dynamic, because before I really didn't want to, they're so negative. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to, I just would avoid talking with them. And so it's helped me a lot. And then it's helped me, like my wife and my kids, I've been using it talking with them. My friends, I've been using it talking with them. I've actually tried, sharing it with people, a few people about, hey, this is something I've been learning and I'm practicing. So, yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, I think this is something that everybody can use. That's why I was so excited about getting you on the show, because I was like, oh, you know what? I got to help try to share this with the world, because this is something that's impacted me, like immediately. So,
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I will share a story. You'll remember this, Adam, from the book. But you talked about, how much of a letdown it is when somebody responds and they're not very excited to whatever you're sharing. This was one of the early experiences that started pushing me toward writing a book. And I was dating a woman at the time, a great woman in so many ways. And there was something missing in the connection in the relationship, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I didn't worry too much about it. It was still a pretty new relationship. But I remember vividly, one Friday night we were out on a date and we were walking somewhere, and I was telling her something exciting that had happened during the workday. And I get quite into my stories when I'm talking, and so I'm using my hand gestures, and oh, this happened, this, and I was so excited about that. And I was talking for a good 3 to 4 minutes probably, sharing this story with her. And then I finished the story, and I was all excited. And I remember I look over at her, and she was clearly listening to me, but her response was, "Cool." And that was it.
Oh gosh.
And she was smiling. She was, like I said, she was there. At least it seemed she was present. But I remember looking at her and thinking, "Cool." Like that's all you're gonna say? Like,
yeah.
I've been talking for so long. Like, I was a little embarrassed, and I was like, well, like, and in that moment, I remember pausing, and I'm like, what is it that I expected from her? Because she was listening, like she understood what I said, and yet I was lacking something. I was disappointed, and it wasn't until later that night that I went home, and I was scrolling through Facebook, and I came across an article that talked about some research by a world-renowned marriage researcher named John Gottman. Some of your listeners might be familiar with his work, and I won't go into all the details of it, but the long story short is that a lot of his research showed that when couples are in situations like my girlfriend and I were at the time, where somebody shares something that they're excited about, the way the other partner responds has a huge impact on the satisfaction of that relationship. And the way she responded was positive, but it was just very like, cool, that was it.
Yeah.
Where what I wanted was validation. What I wanted was, oh my gosh, that is so exciting! Congratulations! You worked so hard on that presentation. That you've got to feel amazing, right? That response is very validating because she recognizes that I'm excited and she's sharing in that excitement with me. Whereas her first one, it was just cool. It was very detached. It didn't have any empathy in it. And so Gottman's research, he talked about how by observing these and other interactions basically makes or breaks a marriage years down the line.
How people turn towards each other or turn away from each other. Exactly, I remember that. Exactly. Yeah. That was interesting too. Because with my wife and I, we've been together since '97, and we've been married since '99. And I just started thinking about it. I was like, throughout the day, there are a bunch of little opportunities like that, where we look for validation from our partners. And I feel like my wife and I have a really strong relationship, and there's always room for improvement. There's always, I've always got to work on stuff. She's always working on stuff, but we turn towards each other, and we're there for each other with, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, it's not, in a relationship, it is work, but it's not, to me, it's not a bad kind of labor. I enjoy the things that I do to help build my relationship with her. And I appreciate the stuff that she does to, build the relationship with me. And when I was listening to you about the, and you have to pardon me, I have a cough drop in my throat, so if I sound a little funny.
No worries.
We've had this little weather change around here. But when I was listening to you talking about that in the audiobook, I thought, yeah, this really makes sense, because, you can see where it's not just like when people are divorced. I've had a lot of different friends that have been divorced, and it wasn't just one major thing. It was like a bunch of little things. And I think most of it was because of communication, or lack of communication, or negative communication, and a lack of understanding on each other. So I thought that was really cool how you talked about that in the book, and that you were able to, show, hey, this is something I've kind of connected here. Like, this is happening to me, and this, yeah. So
well, and I love what you said, Adam, about how you don't see the work that you do on your relationship as a bad kind of work, because the reality is we're going to be working on our relationships till the day we die.
Yeah.
And that's not bad. I think sometimes we can slip into this expectation of, oh, my relationship isn't where it needs to be.
Right.
I wish it was more like so-and-so's relationship, right? Or I wish it was like what I see on TV, and until it's there, I can't be happy, and so I have to work, or I wish my spouse or my girlfriend or my boyfriend would just do blank, and we can get so wrapped up in what we don't have and how we think our relationship should be that it can be quite taxing, versus I think a much healthier approach to it is, yeah, our relationship isn't perfect, because no one has a perfect relationship. So we're going to work on these things this week, this month, this year. I'm going to work on this. We're going to read this book together. Whatever it is for you in your relationship, I think there's a lot of health in just recognizing that it's not perfect, and that's normal. That's okay. And as long as both people are willing to work on it and willing to work on each other, that's a great relationship, because you build with each other over time, and it gets better.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree. My wife and I feel like we have a great marriage, and, like I said, it's not like 100% all the time, happy-go-lucky. I think of Tony Robbins told this story one time, and I love this story, but he was talking about, like, when you first get in a relationship, it's like, everything is so wonderful and so great. And, like if your spouse says, would you please take out the trash? You're like, I'm taking out the trash. You're so excited about it. And then, as time wears on, those things kind of, oh, why should I have to take out the trash? You want me to take the trash out now? Why can't you take the trash out? And, and I think just to paraphrase, like he was talking about how, at first we have that euphoria of that new love and all that. And then after a while, if you don't have that, and if you're not turning towards, your spouse or your significant other, then it's going to seem like a chore instead of, just pulling your own weight. And a lot of people say, you should do 50-50 in a relationship. I think you should be 100-100, because your 100 today might be 40 or 50%, but my 100 today might be 200 or 300% of, what I can give. And if you're giving 100% of yourself all the time, and what you can do, the other person's going to be stronger sometimes. The other person's going to need you more sometimes, and you're going to need them more sometimes, and sometimes you're not, And
I love that.
Yeah, I just think that, building a relationship with anybody, and it's not just your spouse. So it's, like you and I have a different relationship with you. I just met you, and I reached out to you, than you would have with, your brother or your sister or whatever. You have an opportunity whenever you're communicating with people, I think, to be able to build those relationships. And that's one of the things I really loved about your work. I know I've said it a couple times. I mean, I might sound like a fanboy here, but I was really taken aback by the book, and the principles that you apply in it.
Yeah, well, it's powerful and it's needed, and I don't claim to be the expert really in any area in life. I like I mentioned on the book, it's like what I can offer is what I've learned and what works for me, and you can take it and use it and tell me if it works or if it doesn't. Now, thankfully, hundreds of thousands of people are saying, "Hey, it works," and I'm like, "Oh, great! It's not just me."
Yeah.
And yet, that's just the start. I'm always learning new things. Every day, every week, I'm looking at my own relationships and saying, "Oh, this is something that I want to tweak here. Oh, okay, yeah, I messed up here. I apologize. I'm going to be better in this way." And that communication, Adam, that you mentioned early on, I do find that is one of the major issues in any relationship, or one of the areas that causes the most grief in any relationship, because it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Those communication skills are like the most critical skill that we can learn as a human being, and yet we're not formally taught them. And so validation is one of them. Being able to empathize better with people is one of them. Knowing how to start and navigate and resolve arguments and conflict, that's something we're not formally taught.
Right, right.
Learning how to be vulnerable, how to tell somebody how we're feeling, how to respond when someone tells us how they're feeling, all of those things we need to get good at, because if we're not, then life gets tricky, because then we just recluse into our own selves and we just go, you know what, fine, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to talk to you,
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. We need to take a little station break I can't believe it's already almost 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. Let me play these station IDs, Michael, and we'll be back in just a few minutes, okay?
Sounds great.
Thanks.
What would you do if you woke up one day and WRUU weren't on your radio dial, like it wasn't even there anymore? You would not be able to find any place in Savannah to get the kind of music and news that only this community radio station brings you. Our more than 60 volunteer hosts would not be working right now to bring you hours of entertaining and stimulating programs. And your global soul would surely miss it. Thankfully, you don't have to wake up without WRUU, because people just like you have made generous financial gifts to keep us going. We are listener-supported community radio, so your donation is essential to our continued presence on the air in Savannah. Go right now to WRUU.org and make a one-time or monthly contribution.
WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
You are attuned to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Friends of Oatland Island will present their annual fall festival, The Harvest and Cane Grinding, featuring old-time music, cane boiling, butter making, and hay rides, on Saturday, November 16th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Oatland Island Wildlife Center on Sandtown Road in Savannah. For more information, call 912-395-1212.
And welcome back, everybody. You are listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and this is the Adam Messer Show. And my special guest today is Michael Sorensen. Michael, you have published a #1 best-selling book called I Hear You, The Surprisingly Simple Skill Behind Extraordinary Relationships. And I love the fact that you put that in the title about relationships. And we were talking right before the break about how people turn towards each other, turn away from each other. and it takes it takes effort and work in relationships. So when you were thinking about these ideas, and you said you had therapy that you did, and how did this kind of all come together for you? Because I know you said you just said that you were looking for something, but what was that process like when you said, you know what, I'm going to be the one that's going to write this book, or I'm at least going to put it out there? What was that like?
Sure. That's a great question, actually. No one's asked me that before. It was...
Well, I'm glad to be the first.
It's been quite the ride, to be honest. So I have felt... I'm a religious person. I believe in God, and I have felt very guided by God throughout the whole writing of the book, because I mentioned earlier that I had a day job. It was a very time-consuming day job, and I never wanted to be an author. I enjoyed writing, but just in my journal and such. And so, but I just kept seeing all of these quote-unquote signs, if you would, that kept pushing me to write the book. And so finally, when I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to do it, what I did is I devoted at least 15 minutes every morning to writing the book, and that's what I committed to. And I just said, I'm going to just keep writing every day, no matter what. And 15 minutes isn't a lot of time. But some mornings it would grow into 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. Mm-hmm. And then on the weekends, if I was feeling especially inspired or on a roll, I would write for anywhere from 8 hours to 20 hours. I would dive into it. And little by little, over a 2-year period, the book just came together, and it was really quite cool. I brought on an editor to help me with the final phase, but then I self-published and pushed it out there. And like we talked earlier on, Adam, it was very vulnerable, obviously, because I wasn't an author. I was not a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a guy sharing things that I have learned through my own experience, and put it out there. And thankfully, like you mentioned, it's done remarkably well.
I think one of the reasons why it's done so well is because it resonates with people, not from kind of like hey, listen, this is the lecture type practice. It comes across to me listening to it, and I started listening to it again. I finished it on Monday, and I started listening to it again. And it's almost like when you read a book or watch a movie or something like that, or hear a song or something like that a couple times, you pick something new up every time. And one of the things I noticed is that you have a very down to earth approach with your, and you're not even trying to like push advice, more so that you're trying to say like, hey, this is something that worked for me, and other people have tried it out and it works for them too. So I just want to share this with you.
Right. That was exactly my approach.
Yeah. Well, I like talking about the writing, dedicating the writing time or whatever. I think that is also one of the things that I've noticed with authors. I'm an author as well, an indie author, and then I write for the Savannah Morning News, do Savannah as a journalist. But when people say I want to be an author or I want to be a writer, and sometimes people ask me, when can I consider myself to be a writer? I'm like, well, do you write? And if they say no, I say, well, you have to write to be a writer,
Yeah.
and you have to do the thing that it is that you want to be, and I think getting that dedicated schedule, it seemed like it snowballed for you, where you'd have 15 minutes, maybe one day, and maybe a half an hour on a different day, or maybe like an 8-hour window on a Saturday or whatever. And, putting it together and then getting to the point where you're like, hey, you know what? I'd like to polish this up a little bit. Let me get an editor, so you're already kind of self-checking and saying, hey, how can I make this a better thing? So
right.
It all came together. I didn't actually know that you were self-published, though. That's pretty cool too.
Yeah. Thank you. It's kind of in my nature. I like to do things right, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I consider myself a bit of a very much a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah.
And so I kind of took on the challenge. I love learning new things. I love seeing what I can do and how well I can do it. And so, in this particular thing, I wanted to have control from start to finish, so that I knew that it was going to be presented in the way that I wanted. And for me, that was going the self-publishing route. And so And then, of course, my background is in marketing, and so that helped. I thought to myself, well, if I'm worth my salt at all as a marketer, I should be able to market my own book as well.
I love it.
So,
I love it. Your website is so clean too. I love it. I mean, it's just a very straightforward, very clean.
Well, thank you.
Flow through, and that I love that you said that you're a recovering perfectionist. I'm also still on that journey. I tell you what. Do you know what's better than perfect?
What's that?
Done. Getting it done.
Yes.
Amen. That's something I have to tell. It's a little joke that I came up with to remind myself, like, hey, if you wait till it's perfect, or if you wait till you have all the resources, or if you wait till you have all of this or all of that, there's always going to be something that you don't have that prevents you from starting or finishing something, right? So
true. So true.
You have been doing a lot of speaking engagements with this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, again, I'm still shaking my head that here we are talking about all my speaking engagements, because I never thought I would be doing speaking engagements. I published the book, and I thought, that's it, done, back to my normal life. But obviously that wasn't the end of it. I started getting reader emails. I started getting people reaching out, lots and lots of podcasts and radio shows, and then eventually the first speaking opportunity. And so, and then that's grown. And so just recently, in fact, it was 3 weeks ago, I think, I just returned from Canada, where I was invited by L'Oreal Cosmetics, one of their divisions, to speak with a group of their top physicians about how to better connect and communicate with their staff and with their clients. And the type of training that I do now largely is within corporations. Mm-hmm. Managers, leaders, owners of companies, businesses, because communication, as we've talked earlier, is critical in every aspect of life. And I think that while it's critical in every relationship, people don't always pick up on it until money's on the line. And now when there's business, now when you could make or break $1 million, or if you get that new hire that you're wanting or you don't, or you hang on to your best employees or you don't, a lot of that comes back to communication skills. Yeah. And so that's what I talk about quite often, is how to improve workplace communication, how to connect better with your team members and with your clients, and the surprising power that has, not only on the bottom line and to help make you money, but just at improving overall workplace satisfaction, which is huge, obviously, because we spend most of our lives at the office or at work in some form or another.
So true. That is so true. We spend more time sometimes with our coworkers than we do with our loved ones. So mm-hmm. It's crazy, but that's the world we live in.
Yep. Yeah.
I wonder with that, because you talk a lot about relationship building. How receptive are people? Because in the corporate environment, it's different than blue collar. It's different than retail. Just depends on, I guess, the product. But there's corporate language, and it's almost, to me, almost like a legalese or corporateese or whatever. How do you take that down to earth approach and apply it with principles and language, so that no matter who your audience is, you can apply it and say, hey, this is what you can do? Because it really doesn't matter if they're selling makeup or if they're selling widgets. People are people, right?
Right.
How do you apply that and change it around for them?
Well, thankfully, again, we're all human. And so I am able to preserve that same, hey, this is just who I am, this is who you are, let's talk energy. Mm-hmm. Because I think that people find it refreshing, even and perhaps especially in a corporate setting. I still frankly don't understand why some of traditional corporations are suits and ties and very buttoned up and very professional. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a place for professionalism. You should always be professional in a business setting. Yeah. But I don't like it when it takes away from the humanity of people. I think that's where it gets dangerous, and that's where it costs corporations money, but it costs their employees happiness and satisfaction, is when we forget that we're all human.
Yeah.
And when we forget that we have feelings, and when we forget that there's actually value in connecting with people and in caring about them. And so when I go in and I talk, I like to tailor my my speaking gigs to the specific industry that we're talking about. But I still approach it with the same intro. Here's who I am. Here's my background. And yes, we're going to talk about how validation and communication skills can improve your business, but this is going to make an impact in every aspect of your life. This is going to improve your at-home relationships with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, with your siblings, with your friends. And people recognize that right off the bat. And so thankfully, even if I'm speaking at a corporation, I talk about it in the business setting and then out of the business. And almost every example, I give one about how it's going to impact you at work and how it's going to impact you at home, and how you might handle this with a coworker and how you might handle this with your spouse. So it's kind of, I like to blend the two worlds, because we're kidding ourselves if we think that our employees come to work and magically all of their at-home problems go away, right? And we're kidding ourselves if I think that because I was up late last night having an argument with my spouse, that's not going to affect me at work, because it absolutely will. So it all plays together.
Yeah, I like how because a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, most of the people I've ever met, they think right off the bat it's like, what's in it for me kind of mentality. And if you don't have that buy-in right off the bat, it's kind of hard to get it later on from folks.
Absolutely.
So, and I think the simplest, easiest form of language is the best. You don't have to use fluffy, high in the sky type language for people to really understand your message. And what's the point of communication if people don't understand your message?
Right.
So I think there's a time go ahead.
I was going to say, or if it doesn't feel authentic.
Yeah.
Right? If you're just kind of reciting a script or saying words just because, this guy on the radio said you should say it this way.
Right.
That doesn't work either,
Right. Well, that's the thing when I said earlier, like it felt a little canned at first, because I was practicing. I wasn't, just doing it like a script, but it's one of those things where, if you have something like a script like that, you can say, hey, I can understand how you feel. I might not have said it like that before, but I like how you were talking about adapt it to the way you would normally talk. You don't want to sound like a robot, but you can take that same phrase and you can change it a million different ways, So I love being able to learn and grow with that. It's kind of weird, but about maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was talking to somebody about what I think is going to be something big on the horizon with business, and I think it's going to be like emotional intelligence and communication. And they were like, well, emotional intelligence? I was like, yeah. I said, I really think we're so hyper connected today. You can find out, someone's online presence and their, whatever. You can find out a ton of stuff about them, but do you really know that person? And can you understand where they're coming from? Like with your book with the validation and the empathetic listening and those skill sets. A lot of people, I think, like you said earlier, were not taught those things in school. Our parents weren't taught those things, and here we are in a post-internet world where we can watch videos of someone live streaming 24/7.
Right.
So what kind of communication skills are we learning now? And I think empathetic listening is a great one to practice, and communicating, like the validation thing. That's I've done validation before. I just never really had a term for it. And now that I'm aware of it, it's like, oh yeah, I can practice this to become a better communicator, not just a listener, but a better communicator to help build these relationships. So
absolutely. Yeah, and it's we for the any listeners that might be joining, we've been talking about validation as essentially helping somebody feel heard and understood, right? And one of those, and simple validating comments are just, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened, right? Or you're kidding me. Or you can validate people's excitement, right? So you say they just won an all expense paid trip to the Caribbean, and they're like, oh my gosh, you can just jumping in and being excited with them is validating because it helps them feel like you appreciate them. And so I love, Adam, what you were saying about how sometimes when people read my book, they start practicing it, if it doesn't come naturally to them, it can feel a little forced, right? So if you're talking to your coworker and maybe you disagree with what he's complaining to you about, and you say, well, that must be really frustrating for you. I can see why you would feel that way. That feels pretty robotic.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, but that's fine if that's where you go when you're first practicing. But like you mentioned, I always recommend people just adapt the verbiage to be how they would normally talk. And, I mentioned that validating statements have two parts. They identify an emotion, and then they offer justification for feeling that emotion. But that doesn't mean that you have to always have two sentences. I can see why that would be frustrating for you, and I would feel the same way. You don't have to say it like that. You can just say, oh my gosh, that would drive me crazy.
I'll tell you another one that's worked for me.
That satisfies both.
I'm sorry.
What's that?
Well, this is, and I didn't realize this is what it was until I saw your book and heard your book. But someone told me a long time ago, sometimes you can just say, wow, when someone's dumping something on you that you're just like, wow, this is a really emotional, and I don't know how to process it, and I don't know what to say. You can just say, wow. Another one is awe. You're like, awe, it's just, I don't know. I mean, those work because there's sometimes where I don't know what to say, but I don't want to ignore the person,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because
I love that.
And that was something that someone showed me a long time ago, like that helped. It's actually helped me over the years because I didn't know how, I didn't even know about emotional intelligence until I was like 30, and
right.
so all these things, that I've tried to work on and learn, because I wanted to be a relationship person, not a transactional person. And that's one of the things I think, we can all work on. Like, even when you're talking about the validation having a couple parts, you don't want it to seem forced or unnatural. I think earlier you were saying about being authentic. You got to be true to yourself, and it can't be, well, Michael Sorensen said, it's like, it's not going to work. But if you say, hey, I'm working on my communication skills, and I'm just trying to see what fits for me. I actually used that liner this week. I'm like, I'm just trying some stuff out here because it's new for me. And when you're new, you're not going to be a pro.
Right.
The validation thing for me is like new. So I'm just trying to, kind of work my way through and say, hey, I can understand where you're coming from without having to agree with you, but I can understand how, make you feel X, Y, Z way.
Yeah. And I love that you are just real with people. I remember 6 months or so ago, I got an email from a reader asking a similar question where he said, okay, so I read this book and it was very eye-opening. And so I've been practicing it, but I'm not great at it. It feels a little forced. My wife read the book too, and now we're both working on it. But the question we have is, now that we both know about it, does it lose its power? Like now
secret.
I know that you're trying to validate me, right? It's like, so do now, it's like, oh, and I thought about that question, and my answer is no with an asterisk. So my whole family, as you can imagine, now is very well aware of validation, and my wife hears me speak, and she's read the book, and so we all know what validation is. And sometimes, if I'm talking and then, my brother is validating me, like I know he's validating me, but because we've gotten comfortable with it, it doesn't take away the power of it. In fact, it adds to it, because now I can approach my wife and just say, hey, I just really could use some validation right now. Would you mind just listening?
That would be awesome.
She knows what I mean by that, right? And
I could have used some validation yesterday. Honestly, I could have used some. Yeah, I had a rough day yesterday, but it's so awkward to ask somebody like, hey, can you validate me? They're like, what?
Right.
Right. I think I'm the first one in my peer group that actually, knows about this. And I'm not saying that there aren't other people that I know that are aware of this, but yeah, I was having a rough day yesterday. I was like, I really could, I could use some validation right now. So I was trying to validate myself. I was like, well, it'd be understandable if going through what you're going through and blah, blah, blah. And I think, what you're talking about there is like when people, being inauthentic or they're not being genuine, it's like if someone were to tell me, something awkward and I was like, oh, and it didn't match, it would sound so weird. It just sounds so like, like, why did you just say "oh" when I told you I bought a pair of Nike shoes, or whatever?
Right.
Like, oh, like, what?
Like, you're cute. Like, what are you?
Yeah. Because that kind of triggers that I wasn't really listening to you in the first place type thing,
Right.
And
right.
I think it's pretty cool. So how does that work? Because the validation thing, when you say, hey, like, I mean, it's almost, I don't want to sound funny here, but it's almost like, do you have like validation bucks or, like validation cues or anything like that? You're like, hey, like I'd like to cash in. Can I get some validation, please?
Yeah. Well, it's to the point. So when people first hear about validation, right? So like if you were to go up to your buddies and say, hey man, I could just use some validation right now.
Yeah.
They're probably going to interpret that as, so you just want me to tell you that you're awesome, that I like your shoes,
right?
Like you just want like lip service here, or like what is that, right? And
Yeah.
So that's where it's helpful. The more people understand it at the level that I teach it in my book, because while the term is validation, really what we want is to feel heard and appreciated.
Yeah.
And so when somebody understands it at that level, so if my brother calls me up and says, hey, I just would really use some validation, I don't say that as, okay, I just have to tell you how awesome you are, right?
Right.
I hear that as, he just wants me to listen, and he doesn't want advice. So it's kind of those two things where
I love
when
that.
they say, hey, I need some validation, that to me says, Michael, turn off the advice switch.
Yeah.
Or at least wait. You'll remember in my book, I talk about how advice and assurance is great. You just need to bring it in at the right time in the conversation. And that's almost never at the beginning. So when my brother's talking to me, I need to listen to him and empathize with him and go, oh, gee, wow, right? I can't believe that. That's a really hard situation. And then I can say, after it kind of calms down and he's done sharing, I say, so what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Or I have a few thoughts on that. Do you want to hear them? And then if he's open to it, then he'll ask. Then I can give that advice. Then I can give that feedback. But up until then, all he really wants is just to feel heard and appreciated.
I have to confess something here. Just listen to you talk about that with your brother. I had a job working with students, adult students at a university for about 10 years. And one of the things that my job was is to problem solve and to help students resolve their issues. And it got to the point where listening to your book made me realize that I'm like one of those over-helper type people. And I was like, okay, it opened my eyes up, because I was like, you know what? When they're venting or they're wanting validation, because a lot of people don't say I want validation, they don't even know what that is, but they'll say, they might tell you that they want to vent, or they might just start venting. And most of the time,
right.
I've just
most
noticed
of the time they just jump into it, right?
Yeah, and trigger, boom, boom, boom. My brain was in auto help mode. Like, okay, well, let me evaluate their situation. What can I do? What kind of resources are available? How can I help them now, right? Because that was the job that I had to do that. I don't have to do that, Michael. I don't have to do that, and it's so liberating. It is so freeing for me to be able to have a conversation now and be able to recognize that, okay, wait a minute, this person, 99% chance here, they don't actually want my advice, and they don't need me to resolve their problem. They just want to get it off their chest.
Right.
That was so liberating for me. That was so freeing. I felt like a weight came off my shoulders. Matter of fact, I had a friend of mine at work that he would get aggravated with me because I would try to help somebody that I would see needed help. And he's like, you don't have to be a white knight. You don't have to, I'm like, I'm not trying to be a white knight. That's just me. I like to help people. And I realized, like, okay, wait a minute. That was part of my training for my job. And,
Yeah.
Yes, it's still important. Like if you see somebody with a blown tire or, it's important for us to be good Samaritans, I think.
Yeah.
But when someone's coming to me with a problem, I don't have to be the guy to fix their problems anymore. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it felt so, so good. I mean, honestly, it felt so good. And I had a conversation with the same guy. I was like, I realized that I've been doing this. And I said, and I also realized it's affected our friendship because, you get aggravated with me because, you feel like it's imposing on you. And I can understand that now. Before I was like, why are you getting upset because I'm trying to help somebody? So
okay, I'm trying to help you.
yeah, not necessarily him, but like if we were doing something and, I'd see somebody needing help, I would go help them. And so we actually had a good little conversation about that. And, he's on the other side of the spectrum where he's like, I just assume people, don't really want to hear my advice anyway. And I was like, well, I guess. I don't know about that. Because I think people come to you when, you have something of value. Either, like you said at the beginning of the conversation, there are some people that you go to and you talk with, and there are other people you don't. And I feel like if someone's coming to me and they want to talk about a problem, it's because they feel like I can help them, or that, now that, it's like maybe they just want me to listen, and there's a reason why they're trusting me with that. So that's just a personal experience I want to share with you about, kind of like a eureka or aha moment I had from, the book.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And you keyed in on something that I think is critical. And that's that people oftentimes, when they come to you or any of us sharing something, they don't know what they want.
Yeah.
Most of the time, like what they want is relief, assuming it's something it's difficult, right? If it's a difficult coworker, if it's they lost their job, if it's their relationship is struggling. And so they come and they start sharing something with you. And what they most often want is validation, but they don't know it by words. They don't know that, right? And so that's why I recommend always erring on the side of caution and not jumping in with advice right out the gate. Because you can always offer it later, right? You can ask if they want it later. But when in doubt, when someone's sharing something with you, they just assume they want validation. Assume they want you to feel the emotion that they're feeling, to kind of get in the situation with them and go, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Oh, that's so cool. Jump into it with them there. Because 9 times out of 10, if somebody is coming to you with a problem, they already know how to solve it.
Yeah.
I love what you said about your job was to help students fix their problems. But if you think about it, most of us would probably think, well, that means my job is to fix their problems. But that's actually not what you said. You said your job was to help them fix their problems.
Yeah.
And that's what validation does. Is it's crazy because, like you said, for all of you fixers out there who feel like it's your job to help somebody feel better, to make them happy, the great news is if you master validation, your job just got 10 times easier because most of them already know how to fix their problem. I share a story in my book that you might remember again, where a different brother called me up and he was going through a difficult time, and I could empathize. I could relate to what he was going through, and so I validated him and I said, gee, that's super tough. It was a breakup actually, and I just said that sucks. Like it's especially hard when you still see her around, right? It feels like you'll never get out of it. And he's like, yes. He's like, that's exactly how I feel. Like I just want this to go away, but I don't think it's going to go away. And so we talked back and forth a little bit, and then a thought came into my mind on what he should do to feel better, basically, at least the way it went through my mind. And I thought, this is the solution to his problem, quote unquote. But before I jumped in and gave him that advice, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to ask him a question instead. And I said, so what are you going to do about it? And he paused for a second and he said, well, I actually think that I'm going to do this, this, and this. And it was the exact advice I was about to give him.
Oh, yeah, I remember that story.
Instead of giving him the advice, I just said, that sounds like a good call, and then he said, thank you so much for just listening. I appreciate it. It really helped me kind of sort my thoughts out.
Right.
I feel a lot better. Thank you. And we hung up. And I remember thinking I just listened and validated, and, I empathized with him. He already had the solution, so he didn't need my advice. He just needed somebody to listen. And that is true far more often than you might think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I cannot believe it's already 4 o'clock. We've got to do a station break real quick here, Michael. Everybody listening and tuning in today, thank you for tuning in. We're WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and this is the Adam Messer Show. My special guest today is Michael Sorensen. He is the author of I Hear You, the surprisingly simple skill behind extraordinary relationships. And Michael, we'll be back in just about 2 minutes after the station ID, okay?
Sounds great.
Thanks.
What would you do if you woke up one day and WRUU weren't on your radio dial, like it wasn't even there anymore? You would not be able to find any place in Savannah to get the kind of music and news that only this community radio station brings you. Our more than 60 volunteer hosts would not be working right now to bring you hours of entertaining and stimulating programs. And your global soul would surely miss it. Thankfully, you don't have to wake up without WRUU because people just like you have made generous financial gifts to keep us going. We are listener-supported community radio, so your donation is essential to our continued presence on the air in Savannah. Go right now to WRUU.org and make a one-time or monthly contribution.
WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul.
You are attuned to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with Global Soul.
Friends of Oatland Island will present their annual fall festival, the Harvest and Cane Grinding, featuring old-time music, cane boiling, butter making, and hay rides, on Saturday, November 16th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Oatland Island Wildlife Center on Sandtown Road in Savannah. For more information, call 912-395-1212.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the second hour of the Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer. My special guest today is Michael Sorensen, and so if you're just tuning in, don't worry. This will be on the podcast later on, but we have been talking about Michael's newest book, I Hear You, the surprisingly simple skill behind extraordinary relationships. And Michael, thank you so much for being with us on the show today.
You bet.
I really appreciate it.
So far.
Yeah, me too. And I know it said it's a new book. You've had it out for a couple of years now, but it's still, I mean, to me, even though it's not a brand new book, this concept is the validation and empathetic listening and, building relationships. That is, to me, it's a really new thing out there. I mean, I think you're one of the first to talk about it. I know there are other people that talk about emotional intelligence and empathetic listening and, obviously building relationships. But the validation thing, that's kind of like one of the things that I notice that sets your work apart from other people. And we had a chance to talk a little bit about validation, but would you mind for the second hour here, if you would, there might be some people just now tuning in, but can you kind of just give a breakdown of the validation and kind of like just a short summary of your book?
Sure, absolutely. So most of our lives we're taught the importance of being a good listener, right? And we often talk about how people like people who are good listeners. And the basic premise of my book is that to be a good listener, you actually have to do more than just listen to the other person. You need to listen to them, understand how they're feeling, and then validate their emotions. And validation, in essence, is saying, I hear you. I get where you're coming from. Ah, that's hard. Or, oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. Validation is identifying an emotion and offering justification for that emotion. And that makes a huge difference in how connected people feel to you. And so that's the main focus of my book, is diving into how to better listen to people, how to connect better with them, and how to use validation to help them recognize that you understand and appreciate them.
I think it's great. And a matter of fact, before the break, we were talking. To me, validation is when someone wants to just vent. They're not necessarily going to say, "I want to vent," and they might just start venting, their feelings or their frustration or their happiness. It doesn't necessarily have to be like it could just be an expression of that. And they're not going to say that necessarily, like, like you were saying about talking to your family, that they're so used to saying, hey, I want some validation right now. It's like, hey, I just need someone to hear me right now. And, for folks out there just tuning in, I listened to Michael's audiobook, the I Hear You, The Surprisingly Simple Skill Behind Extraordinary Relationships, on Audible. And I contacted you, Michael, via your website, and I was like, hey, like literally, this is like 2 weeks ago, y'all. I mean, this happened so quickly. So here you are, and I'm pretty excited too, because this week is going to be the first time I ever do like a crossover with my newspaper work, talking about the stuff that I'm interviewing my guests with. So I'm pretty excited. Michael, you're going to be the first one that I do that crossover with the Savannah Morning News, Do Savannah. And we're going to have a printed article. Well, I think it's going to be only digital. But basically, it's going to be in the newspaper, online, talking about these same things. And I actually didn't change, I didn't summarize it. I left it as a Q&A. Because I was like, what? I liked your answer so much. I was like, I felt like it would be an injustice to paraphrase some of the stuff. So I was like, let me just do a Q&A. Because usually I'll paraphrase, I'll extract the information and I'll use a couple quotes. But there was so much good stuff that you put in there. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody, and we're not going to spoil it. But you'll be able to read that later on for free this week in the Do Savannah. So I'm pretty excited about that. So
well, I hope you at least spell check it, because
I
threw my answers out.
I did. I made some minor corrections, but I didn't change the content or the words. So I'm pretty excited about
Great.
that.
Look forward to it.
I had a question about when you get to the part of the conversation when you, like you said earlier, you asked your brother, what do you want me to do about it, or that bridging that gap of, well, do you want my advice? That's almost I don't even know how to say it here, but it's almost kind of like no toes. There's no kind of like no hard feeling type thing where you're saying, hey, accountability. Do you want some advice? Do you want to hear what I think? Or are you just looking to vent? And how do you approach that without being overly offensive with it? And because sometimes, like you said earlier, but it's about vulnerability. But sometimes people are going to be a little bit on edge when they're telling you these things, and it might be like, well, what do you mean? What can you do about it?
Yeah, sure. Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with your level of empathy in that conversation and how the conversation has gone up to that point. So, we've talked about the importance of holding back on giving advice.
Mm-hmm.
Save your advice no matter how brilliant you think your solution is. If your spouse is venting to you, if your parent or sibling or coworker is venting to you about something, do not jump in with advice until after you validated them. Because if you do, most of the times they'll actually take offense to your advice, as weird as that might sound.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a strong way of saying it, because I don't think anybody would say, well, I'm not going to get offended at someone's advice. And yet most of us do, because, again, what we're wanting, if I'm coming to you, Adam, and I'm venting to you, what I'm really wanting most likely is for you to just hear me out and to help me not feel crazy.
Yeah.
But I might not be aware of that. And so if I come to you and I'm telling you about this horrible thing that happened with my brother, and you start giving me advice, well, essentially the message that you're sending to me is, well, that's not that hard of a situation because I know how to fix it already, or I already have the solution. And
right.
it's somewhat disrespectful, even though we mean well. And that's what makes all of this so funny, is that in most of these situations, if you jump in with advice, it's because you're trying to help the person.
Yeah, they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Exactly. And so it just creates this dynamic that we talked about at the very beginning of the interview. It's funny because if you do jump in with advice, most of the time they'll get defensive and they'll tell you why that advice won't work or how they already tried it. So then you'll give them more advice, and then they'll push back and say, well, that's not going to work either. And by the end of it, they're frustrated, and they don't know why. And you're frustrated because you're like, well, why'd you even come to me? And so that's why it actually shows a lot of respect to the other person if you hold off on the advice and then you validate them and you say, gee, that's tough, man. What are you going to do about it? You might ask the question, and if they say, I don't know, well, then if you just casually say, well, I have a couple thoughts on it. Do you want to hear them? Right? It's a very respectful approach to it that I don't think it needs to come across as offensive, right? Because basically what you're saying is, I respect you enough as another adult, as another human being, to recognize that you might not want my advice. You're very capable. You might already know how to fix this.
Well, I like how you break it down in the book too.
Approach?
I love how you break it down, because you kind of set it up where there's different stages of this conversation, and you get to the point where, like you were just talking about, asking the permission. You're getting that permission from them. Otherwise, if they don't want your advice, I think you used an example in your book about talking with your dad at one point, where I can't remember what he was talking about, but he just wanted to vent, and he didn't want any advice from you at all. And he just wanted to talk and or vent some frustration or something like that. And at the end of it, you're like, well, what can I do for you? Or what, how can I help? That kind of thing, those kind of phrases. And ultimately he was like, oh, I don't want your advice, or it wasn't the right time, or something like that. Because sometimes it might not be that they don't want your advice. It's just that they don't want it right then, or they don't want your help right then. Right. So. Yeah.
And the core thing to understand, the reason why that's the case is that, again, I'm assuming that they're venting, right? They're complaining, or they've got something difficult. They're filled with difficult emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I talk early on in the book, because it's critical to understand that in our society, we've done ourselves a bit of disservice by labeling emotions as either good or bad.
Yeah.
Right. We say they fall into one of two buckets. You are okay to be happy and excited and comfortable and, what have you. Those are all quote unquote good emotions that we are okay feeling. But we're not allowed to be angry or prideful or resentful or embarrassed or hurt or scared. All of those emotions we throw into the bad bucket.
Yeah.
And the reason that's harmful is that emotions are just emotions. One of my favorite quotes from William Shakespeare is, nothing is either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so.
Yeah.
In other words, it's how we interpret. It's the stories we tell ourselves about the emotions that make them hurtful.
It's the meaning we give to things. Yeah.
Exactly. Anger is just an emotion, and it can lead us to do very good things. Anger is a critical emotion for our survival, for our own growth and development. If we never got angry, well, like if I just never got angry, especially way, way, way back when, I'd be killed pretty early on, because I wouldn't ever have enough adrenaline to protect myself, and I wouldn't ever rise against people who are taking advantage of others, and so anger can be great.
Yeah.
Fear, we don't like feeling fear, but for the same reasons, it protects us and it helps us. And so I'm getting a little long-winded here, but all of those emotions we're taught to just suppress them, and that becomes an issue, because when we suppress volatile emotions like those, they don't go away. They fester.
Yeah.
And they build, and they just become bigger and bigger. And really, one of the only ways for us to process them is to feel heard, to feel like they're okay. And so if I come to you, Adam, and I'm just terrified about an upcoming opportunity I have, and you say, man, don't worry about it, it's all going to be okay, you're going to be fine. Well, really what that does is it pushes the fear down, and it reinforces in my mind, I shouldn't be scared, but I am scared, but I shouldn't be. Don't be. That doesn't help anything. Versus if you say, dude, I get why you're scared, man.
Right.
That's a big opportunity, and there's a lot at stake. And at first blush, you might think, well, won't that just make him more scared? The reality is no, because what you're saying is you're not crazy. Like that scared feeling you're feeling makes total sense. And the magic there is that when I hear that from you or somebody else, or even just myself, and I go, yeah, of course I'm scared because I'm going to go talk to 2,000 people next week. It lets you let it go. You go, okay, all right, I'm scared, but that just is.
And I love the part how you break it down, with that validation part. I love how you break it down where you're like, okay, these are the things people want to be heard, and even sometimes they might ask you for advice, but they're not really asking for advice. They want you just to listen to them. Mm-hmm. And then, if you have something that you can relate to them, or even if it's not, but you just have a thought, like, okay, wait a minute, what would I do in this situation? If they want that, they'll let you know through those little cues, those little verbal cues. But I like how you use those prompts with people to say, hey, what can I do? Did you want some advice from me? Or, and being connected and being completely present in that conversation, being in the moment and being mindful of the conversation that you're having with that other person, I feel like can add to that authentic, empathetic understanding and communication with them. Because if you're not, if you're thinking about like, what am I going to eat for dinner? What am I doing later on? And this person's coming to you with a serious problem, or it might not even be serious to you, but it's serious to them. But you're not fully engaged, it's going to come off as, disingenuous, or you don't, that you're not really, there with them. You're not really hearing them. So I don't know. I just think it's a cool thing that you're doing with this. And I feel like a lot of people can benefit, and they don't have, it's not like it's expensive. I mean, I think I paid like $10 or $11 on Audible. And they even have a thing where, and this is not a plug or anything like that for Audible, but if you're a first time listener for Audible, they have something where you get like the first 2 books for free or something like that. So, yeah. I mean, so it's like you can get all of this awesome, skill set advice for free. So,
yeah, exactly.
Tell me about what you got going on now. I know you do coaching and things like that. How has your world changed from what you were doing before to putting this book out there and having this demand for your time? How has that changed your world?
It's been crazy because I actually still work the full-time day job.
Oh, wow.
So basically I have 2 full-time jobs now.
Wow.
So
it is true that you can be a good artist or a good author and still have a day job, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Time will tell, right? It's definitely starting to get taxing as all this stuff has taken off. And so, yeah, I continue to promote the book. I always appreciate opportunities like this one, Adam, to just chat more about it and to help get the message out there. And so that's my key focus now. I mean, you asked how it's changed my life. That it certainly has, because I am doubling down on my mission to help people build healthier, happier, more connected relationships. I hear you. That book talks about one core skill of validation and a lot of surrounding principles, but there are many more things that I learned from therapy and then just through life that are every bit as powerful. And so I'm considering writing a couple follow-up books. I'm posting, I won't say frequently, but every now and then on my website, on my blog, michaelsorensen.com. And I'm working on an online training course as well, just to try to share more of these principles and ultimately, like I said, help people strengthen their own relationships.
I think it's a really neat approach, especially when you talk about, like you're not a medical professional. These are just things that you have learned as a human being and going through it yourself. I love how you are very open with going to therapy, and that you developed this sense through your own personal introspection with the therapy.
Yeah.
That's not an easy thing to admit. I mean, I think it's more common now today because of social media. A lot more people will share, having different issues, but it's still not prevalent. I mean, there's still a lot of stigma out there. Like when I was younger, I was diagnosed with bipolar disease, and you tell people that, and they're like, "Oh, okay, they automatically either understand because they might have it, or they might have somebody that has it in their family, or they're automatically afraid that you're just going to be like this crazy person, you know?
Right.
And it's hard to share that with people. It's hard to put it out there,
Yeah.
you know, and say, hey, I went to therapy. I did this and I did that. How did you get to the tipping point where you're like, you know what? I don't care if there's a stigma with it. I'm going to share this with other people.
Yeah, well, I hit that tipping point once I realized how starved the world is for the principles that I learned in therapy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It was after, my 4-ish years, twice a week, meeting with a therapist in a group setting, that this is going to sound funny. Have you ever seen the movie The Matrix?
Yeah.
So you know how, the basic premise, sorry if it spoils it for anybody who's listening, is that
there is no spoon.
The world is just like a computer program,
mm-hmm.
and we're all living in it just thinking this is just life. But those who are able to escape the Matrix, there's a scene where Neo, the main character, suddenly it clicks,
mm-hmm.
and it resonates with him, and he understands it, and now he's looking at the world, and it's no longer what he's used to seeing. Now it's just computer code.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh my gosh, this is what it is. And now he knows how to manipulate the laws of physics, and he knows how to navigate through this world so much easier. Like, he's fighting these people now, and he's just not even breaking a sweat because he's like, oh, this is so easy. That's almost how I felt after a few years after therapy, where I started looking at all these situations that would just throw me for a loop, that I would just stew over for days or weeks, or I would just get so worked up over situations at work. And suddenly I'm like, oh, that's all that is. I'm feeling codependent now. I have a word to use.
Yeah.
Oh, he wants validation. Oh, this is just drama. And this is where suddenly I was like seeing the Matrix code, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I can navigate this now. And so I wanted to start sharing that with people more. And so that's why I became more open. I'm like, okay, stigma or not, therapy is awesome. Assuming you get the right therapist. That's a huge caveat. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that can screw you up pretty badly by enabling you, or saying, oh, you poor thing. Yeah, you have, this disorder, and it's just the way life's going to be, and people have to walk on eggshells around you. I disagree with that type of therapy. But the type where people will come in and call you out, teach you the principles, teach you to take responsibility for your own life,
mm-hmm.
that is life-changing.
I have to share this with you, talking about that, because you just reminded me. Several years ago, I was going to see a therapist twice a week as well for, 3 or 4 months. And I was just dealing with clinical depression at the time. It was situational depression of some stuff going on in my life. And I remember my insurance was going to lapse because I was leaving the place that I worked in January. And so I saw the doctor like right before Christmas or whatever. And I told the doctor, he said, well, I want to see you after New Year's. And I said, well, I'm not going to be here because I'm not going to have insurance. I said, but if you want me to, I can, send you an email, check in with you or whatever. And the guy literally told me, he's like, well, I think you're going to be okay. I was like, you've been having me come here twice a week for the last 3 or 4 months, and now all of a sudden I don't have insurance and I'm going to be okay? And the guy never offered any kind of advice at all. He was one of the ones that just sat there and listened. And I have found, just working on my own issues, talking to other people that have experienced things like that, but personal development has helped me a lot. You're talking about your spirituality with God. I'm Catholic and I believe in God, and I have a good relationship with Jesus and God. I don't push that on other people, but it's a main staple in my life, Yeah. And it helps me. Meditation helps me. Talking with other people helps me. This validation skill, it was just like one of those things. It's like you said, with the Matrix, like, oh, ding, 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 ding. I can use this, and I can see how I can, it just really was an eye opener for me. I mean, like when I said earlier how it relieved me of having to fix other people's problems just because they came to me with their issues, it was like a huge weight off of my shoulders.
Right.
And my dad, he had schizophrenia and things like that. So, this is something like that's run through my family. And I mean, it's always been a stigma. And up until recently, I was just like, I I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to share it with people. But it's one of those things, again, with the Matrix, it's almost one of those things where you like, if you know about it, and you recognize it in other people, and you see it in other people. And, I saw something that reminded me so much of like how life is, but hurt people are the ones who hurt people, and hurt people are the ones who are the nicest to people. It's like they're almost either way. The hurt people are the ones that hurt others, and then the hurt people out there who are nice to others. And I don't want to be one of those people.
Powerful.
Yeah, I don't want to be one of those people that hurts other people. I want to be one of those people that is nice to other people. Because I know what it feels like to feel that, weight on you,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's powerful.
I think it's really interesting how you took your experiences and you said, hey, I'm going to put this into something that people can use, because I can't be the first person that's shared that with you that felt that way. I'm sure you've had other people come to you and say, hey, the same thing. But, I think there are a lot of people out there that when they can just have this one, and it's not just one thing, but, it's like a little skill that can help you throughout your day, help you to manage doing those tasks that you need to do, help you be able to navigate. Because to me, I think one of the biggest things in a day sometimes is just communicating with other people. There's days where I don't want to talk to anybody, but I still have to talk with people, and
yeah.
I know there are a lot of people out there that feel that way. They're just like, not that I'm antisocial. It's just that there's some days where it's just hard for me to deal with talking with other people about, anything.
Yeah.
So.
Totally. I can relate to that. I consider myself an ambivert.
Ambivert,
part introvert, part extrovert, depending on the day or whatnot. But there are definitely those times when I'm like, I just don't really want to talk to people right now. And that's fine. You don't have to always be everyone's beck and call. And, the better you can understand these communication relationship skills, the better those conversations are when you do talk to people.
Oh,
when
yeah.
You do connect with them.
Oh, yeah. It's just like when I found out about emotional intelligence, here I was 30 years old and taking it as a 1-credit elective to finish up my undergrad. And I was like, yeah, this is a 2-week class. I'll just get through this. I'll just bear through it. And I read the book and I was like, wait a minute. This is what? And it opened my eyes up. And then I was like, oh gosh, I got to tell people about this. Did you know about emotional intelligence? And there are a lot of people that still don't know about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
But the corporate world, they're pushing emotional intelligence a lot, but,
thankfully,
and that, I think it's a good thing because, if we can learn how to not only talk with other people the way that they want you to talk with them, but also be able to listen to them the way that they want you to listen to them. And we do that reciprocal, we reciprocate that for each other. I think like you said earlier about trying to teach people how to have better communication skills, not only just at the job, but also in their personal life. Right. So I just think it's a pretty neat thing. We've got to do the little, I can't believe it's already I've been saying this like the whole time. Like, I can't believe it's already 4:30, but, we got to do the little station break. Michael, do you mind hanging around with us for the last, half hour?
Yeah, no, it sounds great.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. All right, you're tuning in today to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and this is the Adam Messer Show. And my special guest today is Michael Sorensen. He is the best-selling author of his book, I Hear You, The Surprisingly Simple Skill Behind Extraordinary Relationships.
What would you do if you woke up one day and WRUU weren't on your radio dial, like it wasn't even there anymore? You would not be able to find any place in Savannah to get the kind of music and news that only this community radio station brings you. Our more than 60 volunteer hosts would not be working right now to bring you hours of entertaining and stimulating programs. And your global soul would surely miss it. Thankfully, you don't have to wake up without WRUU because people just like you have made generous financial gifts to keep us going. We are listener-supported community radio. So your donation is essential to our continued presence on the air in Savannah. Go right now to WRUU.org and make a one-time or monthly contribution.
WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
All right, everybody. Welcome back. And this is the Adam Messer Show. You're listening to us on WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. My special guest today is Michael Sorensen, and if you're just now tuning in, Michael is a best-selling author of his book, I Hear You, The Surprisingly Simple Skill Behind Extraordinary Relationships. And Michael, this is like #1 on Amazon, not only with the book, but also the audiobook is one of the bestsellers too, right?
It is, yes, in a number of different categories.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing. Like you were telling me earlier that you self-published. You put a couple years of writing, and then you got professionally edited, and you put it together, and you put it out a couple years ago. Since then, you've had experience with people contacting you and saying, "Hey, would you like to be on my radio show like me?" And then corporations having you out. What was you said? Was it L'Oreal? Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
The makeup company. You were
Correct.
just with them, talking with them, and with that, are you allowed to share anything that you talked with them about? Like, was it mostly corporate stuff, or did you, how did what was your presentation like? If you're allowed to share it, that you can. If you can't, if it's whatever, that's no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here today. I always give a free copy of the book to everybody who attends these conferences or these keynotes. And then we walked through the core principles of validation, of empathic listening, of how to give feedback and advice without sounding like a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
Basically taking the concepts, the principles of validation and connectedness and taking them into the workplace, and then helping these physicians understand how powerful that can be, not only in a business setting, but in your day-to-day relationships. And so we walked through those. Of course, we did some exercises. I like to give a lot of examples in those situations that are specific to their industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about a handful of those. It was overall a very powerful opportunity.
I think that's what you should call your next book: How to Give Advice Without Sounding Like a Jerk. That's a great. That would be a great title.
I like that.
You could do so many different examples that are out there, and you could probably use a lot of examples of people that tell you, like, "Hey, this is what I did." So
yeah, it's pretty cool. That's one of the things that I love about where I'm at now on this side of publication. Is I do, like you said, Adam, I do get a lot of emails from readers. I love reading the reviews still on Amazon and Audible and Goodreads because people. Sometimes people say, yeah, it's an awesome, great book. Other times people actually share an experience of how it changed their life.
Yeah.
One that was particularly touching to me, you mentioned a father with schizophrenia. This reader said that her mother had been recently diagnosed with schizophrenia. And up until that point, they had had a very close relationship. They would talk at least an hour a week over the phone. Her mom would ask her how her week had been and back and forth, and they would talk. Well, all of that shifted, I guess, when her mother started having these episodes, and it was very one-sided conversation. And this woman just felt like, I don't even want to talk to my mom anymore because I just don't feel connected to her.
Yeah.
And she has all these crazy thoughts and so on and so forth. Well, she said, Michael, I read your book, and my next phone call with my mom, I decided to try your principles, your method on validation. And I was careful to not agree with her conspiracy theories or whatever it was that she was saying, but I was able to validate and say, Mom, that's scary. If that's what's going through your head, I feel for you there. Whatever the conversation was, she validated her mom, and she said for the first time in a year, I could hear the relief in my mom's voice.
Wow.
And then she asked me how my day was.
Oh, wow.
And we had an amazing conversation. And she said, I finally feel like I'm getting this relationship with my mom back, in large part thanks to validation and understanding how to talk with her more.
That is really neat. I mean, honestly, I could imagine how relieving that is for her. Because
Yeah.
schizophrenia is not, it's not their fault. It's a chemical imbalance, but it's not
Right.
pretty. It's not, it's not a pleasant thing to deal with when somebody has it, especially if you're a child. And yeah, so I could definitely understand where she's coming from with that. It's like, ugh,
I can imagine.
yeah. And I wish I had known about my dad passed away in 2006, so towards the end of his life, I was trying to have a better relationship with him, but I'll be honest with you, we did not have good communication. We didn't have really a great relationship at the end of his life. And, but my mom, I tried to have a better relationship with her since my dad passed. And, we talk every week and, but I can definitely see, and not just see, but I've been using these skills and practicing this stuff already. And, yeah, it's helped me a lot the last, week and a half or so that I've been using them. So
I love it. Yeah, it's good stuff.
yeah, good stuff. Yeah, exactly. Tell me more about what you're planning on doing. You got the new book, or you're working on like a couple topics maybe for a book and a training course. What would the training course be like? Would it be something where somebody can do like an online interactive type thing? I mean, what are you talking about with that?
Correct. Yeah, it'll be an online course. It'll be available on my website, michaelsorensen.com. And my aim there is to, similar to what I've done with the book, distill down the core principles, but I'm going to keep it broader. So my book focuses on validation primarily, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I want this course to do is be as much of a one-stop shop as I can create. Just giving you that crash course into good life relationship skills. And so I want to dive in. I have right now a free course that any of your listeners can just go and download right now if they go to my website, called 10 Days to Better Relationships.
Oh, okay.
And it's a 60-page PDF or so, but it's got pictures and everything in there. But it walks through, it's very bite-sized. Each lesson's like a page and a half. It talks about 10 core principles that can help you immediately improve all of your relationships in your life. And so ultimately, I think that I will spin off of that, and I'll dive deeper into those with this online course for those who are interested. Give better examples. It'll have videos, and different worksheets and things to help people really hone their craft, if you will, on these valuable life skills.
I love continuing education. I do different courses and stuff like that. I don't know if you've ever used Udemy.
Yeah,
that's one of the ones that
familiar with it.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that I like doing. This year I've spent a lot of time on writing skills, and I've done different books. And Jessica Brody, she actually was a guest on the show. She wrote this book called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And there was a guy named Blake Snyder who wrote a series called Save the Cat. Well, Jessica Brody, he passed away a couple years ago, and she actually did that for novel writing. And I had her on the show. She's another best-selling author and really nice lady. And I picked up a couple of her courses on Udemy. And I am a strong believer in self-development, continuing education, lifelong learning. I love audiobooks because, you can listen to an audiobook on the way into work or the way home. A lot of times I just listen on the way into work, but these little courses that you can do, they're not very expensive, but they're skill set developments, and how lucky are we that we have the internet and these smartphones that we can do and have access to information, 24/7. And we could do, classes like that compared to, back in the day, the only way you would be able to do that is if someone were in your area and they had like a seminar, or if you traveled to a seminar, and it was expensive. I mean, hotel costs and, food and accommodations and things like that. It's expensive. So I think it's pretty cool that you're going to be doing a class like that. You said you have that course as that little PDF or whatever is available on your website?
Correct. Yeah. People just go to my website, michaelsorensen.com. It's up at the top in the menu bar. You just click on books, and it's called 10 Days to Better Relationships. And so it's actually available, again, for free. I'm not just here selling my books and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Available for free as a downloadable PDF or as a 10-day email course. The same content, The PDF is prettier and it's all nicely laid out. You can download it and read it whenever. The email course, you get one email a day for 10 days, and it kind of just paces you along the course as well. So both are free, it's whatever people are interested in most. But yeah, that's available on my website.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I see you have, I'm on the website right now. I see you have like an email subscription too. So people can get, I guess, like little tips or whatever that way.
Yep. Whenever I post a new article on there, you can get notified. I try to keep my content, like my book, short, sweet, and to the point. Sometimes articles will be a tad longer if I think the subject matter requires it, but I try to take the same approach that people have appreciated about my book, and that's just tell me one human to another. Yeah. How do I handle this situation? Right? What am I missing here? And so that's my focus on my website there.
The going from doing therapy to writing the book to doing coaching now, what is that like? Because your background's in marketing and business development, right?
Yeah.
So correct. So what is that like? Because you do stress to people like you're not a licensed therapist or anything like that. That you're helping from your perspective and your personal vantage point, I guess, or whatever. But what is that like? With the coaching, how do you run somebody through that and say, hey, these are the practices or this is the principles that I found work? I mean, how does that work for you?
Sure. So I do stress that with clients, and the coaching, to be frank, is still relatively new for me.
Okay.
But it's something that I still stress. I say, look, I'm not a replacement for therapy. So depending on the situation, I do recommend that they find a qualified therapist.
Okay.
But what I find is that sometimes there's a gap between, what you learn in therapy or what you can study online and then the actual application of it. And that's where I aim to step in and be that coach, so to speak, almost being on the sidelines or sometimes jumping in the game with them and say, hey, they might not want to go meet with their therapist every single week, but if we hop on a quick Skype call or phone call and say, hey, here's what happened. How do I handle that better next time? Or how do I handle that now? And all of the content that I teach and all of the principles that I share, they are research backed, so while I myself am not a therapist, I of course look and make sure that what I am sharing with people and helping people with is good information. But ultimately I see it as a good, I see myself as almost a supplement, if you will, to a good therapist, or just somebody to be there and say, hey, you recognize that that's codependent the way you're showing up that way, right? Or he's manipulating you, or you're manipulating her, or those types of things. It's helpful to have somebody on the outside looking in, helping us navigate difficult situations.
Well, I think it's a really interesting approach because I read a lot of self-development and leadership books, and it's very funny or very sensitive out there with the way people set up and they try to sell their services so much. And I like the fact that you were like, hey, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not, this guy. I'm a regular guy just like everybody else. And this is my experience. This is what I've gone through. This is what's worked for me. And that's what I'm trying to share with you. I like that. Yeah. You're not trying to, you're not trying to sell somebody on a subscription service and this, that, and other. And, I always laugh about the next new thing because it's like, oh, what's the new hot thing? Because if you follow personal development a lot, you'll see all these different people that'll start talking about the same topic. And they're like, gratitude. Everybody needs to be grateful for everything, even the bad stuff. It's like, wait a minute, right. I have to be grateful for like having a bad situation? Yeah, it taught you something, didn't it? It's like, yes, it did, but does that mean I have to be happy about it? No. Right. But if you pay attention, you'll see these trends, going through like the self-development community or whatever. But it ultimately always seems like they're trying to sell you on something. It's like, oh, hey, buy my newest T-shirt on, on my t-shirt.com website, or buy this or buy that. And they're like, yeah, let me jump onto a common problem that everybody can relate to, like relationship problems. Yeah. Are you having a problem with your wife or your husband? Yeah, I can help you fix that. It's like, wait a minute, so, right. There's a lot of hokey stuff out there. and I think the internet also kind of leads to, you know, the availability of that. But it's refreshing to see something different, you know, with the way your approach is, because I've checked stuff out from a lot of different folks, and I read a lot of different things, and you know, it's almost one of those things like, if the fish smells too bad, throw it away, you know. It's like if you got to go with your gut instinct on this kind of stuff, because if you don't, you know, if you drink the Kool-Aid, or if you plug into the Matrix per se, you're gonna see what you want to see, you know, instead of kind of dealing with what really is. So
right, I agree.
Who are some of the folks that you like to follow? Who are some of the philosophers or self-development people that you enjoy?
Big fan of Brene Brown, obviously, because vulnerability is every bit as critical to a relationship, and frankly, validation gets kind of tricky if people aren't being willing to be a little vulnerable with you. And so I really like a lot of Brene Brown's work, at least her earlier work. I haven't read the more recent. Another, I guess it's two gentlemen. They wrote a book called Boundaries. I believe it's what is it, Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend, I think. That book is one that I do recommend to a lot of clients because so we've talked most of this episode about validating and helping people feel heard and understood, right? And that encourages them to come and vent to you and talk to you.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, well, what do I do if they're just always complaining and I'm just sick of it? You know, that the more I validate, the more they like talking to me, because I just sit there and marinate in the filth with them. I don't want that, right? So what do I do?
That happens a lot. That actually happens a lot.
Yeah. And so that's
misery loves company, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's where we then need to work on our ability to set these boundaries, to basically say, you know what, I'd love to talk. Now it's not a good time. Can we talk tomorrow? Can we talk next week?
Yeah.
Or,
that's a great one.
Or if it's a close friend or maybe a direct report at work and they're always complaining, you might actually say, you know what, I would love to talk. And, you know, you need to know that it seems like every time you call me, you just want to complain, and it's starting to feel a little draining. I want to support you. I want to be there for you. And I think you need to know that this is how I'm feeling, right? There's a billion different ways you can take it, but all of those are forms of boundary setting and of saying, you know what, this is no longer helping me. Like, I want to help you, but we can only help people if we ourselves are in a good spot. And so I really like their work in that book, Boundaries, because it does a fantastic job of shining the light on certain situations where we might think we're being a good person, quote unquote, by helping people, when actually all we're doing is hurting them and hurting ourselves. So those are two people that I still follow quite closely.
I love how you chose the word and you talk about that in the book as well. The difference between using and to connect the sentences and but. So like you're talking about like validation, if you offer something that's validating and then you follow it up by but, then you're just negating everything you just said. I think you used one of the examples was, I like your haircut, but I liked it better before. And versus like saying and would be like, I like your haircut and I like how you had it before as well.
Yeah.
I like how you use the and when you're talking about those relationships and the boundaries just now, because that was a great way to kind of demonstrate how you can use and versus but, especially when you're talking about like the person that complains all the time. Like, how many, I mean, like realistically, we all have people like that in our lives that all they do is want to complain. And, it's the energy vampires, those are the kind of people. And how do we deal with them? How do we, like you said, I can't help somebody if I'm not in a good spot myself. I might be able to help you, but it's not going to be, it might not be the right thing, and it might deplete me completely. So how do I do that? Or how do I not do that in order to help them better? Because I'm like, I'd like to talk with you. I want to help you with your problem right now is not a good time.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that you picked up on that because it's so powerful. Truthfully, Adam, it's one of my favorite, my most valuable tools in my tool belt, if you will, of communication, that and versus but, because it frees you up to speak freely. It's so powerful that if we go back to that situation that we were just talking about, your friend is just the energy vampire. And if you say, hey, I want to help you, but I feel like you're really negative all the time,
Mm-hmm.
well, really all they're going to focus on is
the butt.
you're really negative all the time. Yeah, it's like, oh, you don't really want to help me, right?
Yeah.
It's funny how it's such a small thing is, whereas you say, hey, I want to help you, and I feel like you're negative quite often.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these little tiny word changes you can make that, you could give, if you're getting feedback. I think about this top of mind as a manager, where if somebody gives a presentation at work and they did a good job overall, and there were a handful of things that I need to give them feedback on that we need to change. So if afterward I come up to them and I say, hey, you did a great job on that presentation, but we need to talk about a few things. Well, what do they remember from what I just said?
Nothing except for the butt.
Nothing's like, oh crap, now we got to talk about things, right?
Yeah.
But if I say, hey, great job on that presentation, and can we talk about a few things that we can do better?
It's like, oh yeah, I did a great job. Yeah, Michael thinks I did a great job. Yeah.
And there are things I can work on. Like the two can live side by side now. Whereas if you say but, then it's either one or the other. You did a great job, but not really.
That reminds me of this time. I had this director, and the guy did not like me at all. I mean, he made it very apparent that he did not like me. One time, he took the entire team to a little theme park. I was the only one he didn't take. And it was just one of those things, we did not get along. And I remember being in a review with him. It was a performance review, and he gave me, it was 5 stars. You could get 5 stars for everything, He gave me all 4 stars except for one. He gave me a 2-star in interpersonal relationships. And he cited my relationship with him as the negative impact. And I thought, wow, this guy, here he is, and he explained to me, one of the areas that I thought, I was like, man, I should have gotten a 5-star. I was like, okay, I'll give you that, we don't get along or whatever. But the one area that I thought I should be really good in was my customer service skills, because my students just loved me and I loved them. Thanks. And he told me, he said, well, in order to get a 5-star on anything, you have to be like the Michael Jordan of that world. And he was one of those people that doesn't matter how good you are not the best at that thing. And I look back at, that, and that was one of those times where I was like, I'm not grateful for this interaction at all. But I learned from it, and I learned, that no, you're not going to be the Michael Jordan of your world, but you can try to work and be the best at that. And you don't have to compete against other people. You can compete against yourself. So when you're taking constructive feedback, I think you just made a great point. It depends on how the person presents it. Because if you say, oh yeah, you did a great presentation, but there's some things I want you to work on, the person's only going to focus on the stuff that is the negative. But if you like you said, if you say, and if you just change that one word to and you say exactly the same thing, except the and part, they're going to, oh wow, Michael said I, had a great presentation, and he wants to talk to me about a couple of things that I can do to make it better. That's awesome. Yeah. He's trying to help me out,
Right.
So
yeah.
I cannot believe that we are we're coming up to the end of the program here, Michael. Thank you so much for being my guest today. Where can people check out your stuff?
Yeah, you can check out my website, michaelsorensen.com, S as in Sam. And like we've talked about, Adam, it's all free content on there. I mean, I talk about the book. You can buy that on Amazon, but on my website, I have a lot of articles that talk about how to validate people when you don't agree with them. I'm just about to publish one about how to validate somebody when they're angry at you and they're yelling at you.
Oh, I can't wait to read that one.
Yeah.
That's going to be a juicy one, I bet.
Yeah, it is, yeah. So I try to keep content fresh there. And of course, I would love to hear from any listeners. If there's any questions that we haven't answered, you can contact me via my website as well.
And that's Sorensen. It's Michael S. and then Sorensen. There's two S's there, so it's going to be Michael S. Sorensen. And Sorensen is spelled SORENSEN.com. Right?
Correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
You have some other stuff that's out there. You've got this awesome program. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, especially on a Sunday. I know you got a busy week and all that, but man, it's been so great talking with you, Michael. Thank you so much.
You bet. Appreciate the opportunity, Adam, and best of luck.
All right, I will talk with you later, Michael, and thanks a lot for everything, and everybody tuning in. Up next is Savannah at Night.
This is WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. This is Forget the Whale from the album What I Tell Myself EP.